Welcome back from the ad break, and let's continue with our lesson. We are going to go on to more of those application questions. Let's look at the first one. So the first one there says, the graph represents the amount of rainfall in City A over the month of March 2023. Study the graph and answer the questions that follow. So we have 3 questions there, but let's quickly study the graph and see what we have been given there. We can see there that on the vertical values, we have been given the rainfall in milliliters, and on the horizontal values, we have been given the number of days. So looking at this graph, we are going to answer these questions. It says there, on which day was the rainfall a maximum? Remember, maximum means highest, and highest would mean vertically. We are looking at the highest value vertically. So when we are looking at our graph here, which day has the highest or the maximum amount of rainfall? If you are thinking of day number 1, then you are absolutely correct, because we can see there that the day with the maximum amount of rainfall, that was 40 milliliters of rain, and that is at a highest, or it is the highest amount of rainfall. On which day was the rainfall at a minimum? Yes, you can see that we have 2 days that absolutely had no rainfall at all, 0 milliliters of rainfall, and that would be day number 3 and day number 4. We can see that. Then it says there, on which days did the rainfall remain constant? Now, remember what it means to be constant? It means that as we are increasing in the horizontal values, our vertical value remains the same. So in this case, this would mean that when we are moving from one day to another day, but when we look at the vertical values, they have not changed. So do we have a specific days where the rainfall was constant? Yes, we do. That is again our day 3 and our day 4. And why are we saying that it is constant? It is because on day 3 there was no rainfall at all, and again on day 4 there was no rainfall at all. The horizontal values were increasing, but the vertical values remained the same. Let's move on to our next question. Now, our next question there says, the graph shows the distance traveled by a car in 4 hours. Study the graph and answer the questions that follow. So we are looking at the graph here representing the distance traveled by a car in 4 hours. So we can see that the distance is represented in the vertical values, and the hours, or the time in hours, is represented by the horizontal values in this graph. So let's look at the questions. The first one there says, is this data discrete or continuous? Now, continuous means it may consist of fractions, and discrete means it can only consist of whole numbers, or numbers that can be counted. Now, is this one consisting of fractions, or can it be counted? Well, we are looking at distance here, and of course, distance can consist of fractions. So this means that here, this is a continuous graph. And of course, our explanation that goes with that is that we can, or the distance can consist of fractions within it. Next, it says, explain the motion of the car between 2 and 3 hours. So we are going to go to the second hour, which is right over there, and the third hour, which is right over there, and we must explain that motion. Now, when we are looking at those 2 points that we've highlighted there, we can see that our horizontal values are indeed increasing because we have moved from 2 to 3. But now, what has happened to our distance? Well, because our distance has remained the same, at 2 hours our distance was at 150 kilometers, and at 3 hours our distance was again still at 150 kilometers. And as we can see that the vertical values did not change, even though the horizontal values were changing. So what is the motion between the second and the third hour of this graph? Well, this graph is constant where the second hour, or where we move from the second hour to the third hour. We can see that the motion of our car was constant, and since our distance did not change, it means that our car did not move, but of course our time continues to move. The last one there says, how far had the car traveled after 4 hours? So we are going to look at 4 hours and we are going to see how far that car had traveled. And of course, we can see there that that car had traveled 200 kilometers had traveled 200 kilometers for the 4 hours that have been given to us. Let's go over to the next question. Now, the next question it says, study the graph below, which shows the number of textbooks received by learners at Lesiba Secondary School per grade, and answer the questions. Now, the first question there says, how many books were received by the grade 9s? Now, for us to find that number, we need to go to the grade 9s. Now, the grades have been represented here horizontally. So we are going to go to the grade 9s and we are going to move up to see how many textbooks were received by the grade 9s. We can see there is the point representing the grade 9s. And when we move over to the number of textbooks, we can see that the grade 9s received 1,200 textbooks. So the grade 9s received 1,200 textbooks. Let's go to the next question. Which grade received the minimum number of textbooks? So we are going to go and look at the lowest point. Remember, minimum is the lowest point. And which grade received the lowest number of textbooks? Well, that is indeed grade 7. So we can see there that grade 7 is the one that received the minimum or the lowest number of textbooks. Question C there says, which grade received the maximum number of textbooks or the highest number of textbooks? Of course, that is easy to locate there. We can see that the highest point there is up there. And which grade is this? This is, of course, a grade 10. So we can say that the grade that received the maximum number of textbooks, that would be our grade 10s. The next question here says, the graph shows the number of cars that a company sold between July and December of 2022. So we can see there that we are told car sales 2022. On the vertical values, we have the number of cars, and on the horizontal, we have the months. So let's answer these questions. The first one there says, which month sold the least number of cars? Of course, when we are talking about the least, we are talking about the lowest, which means we are talking about the minimum number of car sales. So which month is that? Yes, of course, the lowest point is that one there, and the month that sold the least number of cars is September. The next question there says, which month sold the highest number of car sales? And of course, the highest number of car sales, we are talking about the maximum number of car sales. And of course, which month is that? Yes, it is our December. The next question says, how many cars were sold in November? So we are going to go to the month of November and see which point is placed there. And as we can see there, the number of cars that were sold in November are 30 because we can see that that point is at a 30. So these were 30 cars that were sold in November. The next question says, during which months did the sales decrease? Now remember, to decrease means that when we are moving along our horizontal values, or as our horizontal values are moving up, then to decrease would be our vertical values moving down. So we are going to look at where our points moved from being at a higher point in the vertical values to being at a lower point there. So which months is that? Now we can see that from August, we had a sale of 30 cars, and then when we went to September, we went down to 15 cars. So definitely from August to September. Are those the only months where our car sales decreased? Well, of course not, because we can see there that in October we had a sale of 35 cars, but in November we only had 30 cars. So again, from October to November, we definitely had a decrease there. Then there, the last question says, is this data discrete data or continuous data? Now let's look at what we are working with here. We are working with the number of car sales. Now, can we have fractions in the number of car sales? Absolutely not. We cannot. When we are talking about car sales, we need to be working with whole numbers only, because this type of data is the data that is counted. So definitely this is our discrete data, and the reason for that is because we are working with data that is counted. It cannot have fractions, it can only have whole numbers. Then the last question there in our application question says, the line graph shows the temperature during a particular week in a certain town in November 2023. So we can see the graph that we have been given there, and just for 1 week, those temperatures have been recorded and represented in this line graph. Let's look at the questions that go with this graph. It says there, on which day has the maximum temperature? So we are looking for the highest temperature. Now we can see that the highest temperature there is that 30 degrees Celsius, and the highest temperature there would be on a Thursday. We can see that the highest temperature there is the Thursday. What about the day with the minimum temperature? Now, the day with the minimum temperature, there we are looking for the lowest temperature. And remember, our temperature there is measured in degrees Celsius. And the way we would write degrees Celsius there would be that symbol over there. So our temperature is in degrees Celsius, so we are looking for the lowest degrees Celsius there. Can you see it? Of course, we can see it there. That is the lowest, which is 15 degrees. And of course, that was on a Friday. And we are looking for the lowest because our question asked us for the minimum temperature there. Now, on which days did the temperature remain constant? Remember, constant means that even though we are increasing on our horizontal, then our vertical remains the same. Do we have such here? Yes, we do. We can see that our temperature on Monday was exactly the same as our temperature on Tuesday. It did not increase or decrease. So we can see that the days where our temperature remained constant were Monday and Tuesday. And lastly, on which days did the temperature decrease? Now remember, to decrease means to go down. So we are increasing in our horizontal values, but our vertical values are going down. Can we see where our values decreased? Well, if you are seeing from Thursday to Friday, then you are absolutely correct, but that is not the only place. We also have a decrease from Saturday to Sunday. So both those places there, we can see that our temperature is indeed decreasing. Let's quickly go to an ad break and then we'll see you just now.